I am recording here.
Okay.
Amber, but it's what it is.
Yeah, it is. It was bound to happen. So.
To me, the most common idea in Canadian literature was change, because in the different texts we read, there was various changes happening to the characters, to the environment, to their relationship with other characters throughout the story. But the most easiest way to see that is when you read the beginning and you read the end. After you read the entire text, you can go back to the beginning, and you could just wonder if this is the same character you've read, or if you just read like a different character, how they changed so much and all that.
The most common idea, I think, in contemporary Canadian literature is finding oneself. I originally thought it was location or nature, or had to do more about Canada, but like the more we looked at the Canadian literature, I realized it's a lot more about the characters, and they find themselves through nature. So it definitely has to do with oneself.
I think there's a few common ideas in Canadian literature, one of them being identity and characters who are trying to figure out identity. So there's obviously in a few of the books, so in Lullabies for Little Criminals, Baby's trying to figure out who she is as a young adult and her transformation from being a child into young adulthood. And another one would be through Surfacing, and the main character is trying to figure out who she is as well as who her parents are and who she is as a person. And the third one would be in Sunset Grocery, as the child clerk is trying to figure out who she is in relation to the rest of her community.
I think that it's finding a sense of identity, because like Canada, when I was born from Britain, and since it's right next to the States, like both are huge powerhouses, I think as a country we've kind of struggled finding our own sense of national identity. So I think it reflects a lot in the author's novels, in the sense of like the characters are trying to find their own identity, just like Canada's trying to find our national identity.
After reading all the books that we've read, I think the most common idea is finding and embracing a national identity. So what I mean by that is a post-colonial identity, national identity, so a disconnection from previous imperial relationship. So in particular, one author who advocates for a post-colonial national identity is Margaret Atwood. So she defines the importance of being a Canadian and achieving an independent Canadian national identity as separate from Britain and America. So she explores an emerging Canadian identity through her novel Surfacing.
Okay, so I would like to begin my response by saying that there is an assumption that in Canadian literature merely focuses on nature and the natural world, and although we have encountered some readings that have discussed an individual's relationship with nature, I think that the most common idea that we have encountered is the character's relationship with the past, as it is evident that this is a recurring idea as we've confronted characters who have experienced nostalgia for the past, but there's also been a sense that the past functions as a kind of haunting for the characters, and it also kind of serves the purpose that characters can't really escape from occurrences that have happened in the past. So this idea regarding the past seems to reoccur a lot through the literature that we've discussed, but it appears to be strongly evident through Seth's graphic novel, It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken, Margaret Lawrence's A Bird in the House, and MacLeod's As Birds Bring Forth the Sun, and Al Purdy's Lament for the Dorsets and the Country North of Belleville.
The most common idea in contemporary Canadian literature is the presence of the past. Both kind of a play between nostalgia and almost nepenthe, with like the trying to forget about the sorrow that's past. It's seen in Surfacing, with the nameless protagonist having to deal with the loss of her child, the abortion that she had, with the trying to find her father and mother almost, like at the end with the images of the father and how he's gone and she can't really reconnect with it, with her drawings that she does, trying to keep her mind in the past with it and try to almost understand it and be coherent with it. And it's seen again, it's seen in a lot of the literature, but another example is in Lullabies for Little Criminals, with Baby's constant trying to go back to when her father loved her and when she was a child and able to feel loved and be loved and love others and love her life and everything. And sort of the nepenthe that she feels with trying to deal with the sorrow of being neglected by her father, of being left by her mother because she didn't know the circumstances under her mother's death until the very end. As well as her having to sort of deal with and struggle with everything which caused her to go into prostitution and look for love in places that really weren't a loving or nurturing environment.
I definitely feel that is a part of Canadian literature as a whole, because even in the earliest book that we read, the first one, Surfacing, she goes back to her family cottage and she gets lost in the cottage, not somewhere else. It's somewhere where she grew up. Baby, the same thing. They go back to where Jules grew up and her mother grew up. They didn't have her come back, have the aunt come into Montreal to help her grow up. They go back to that feeling, that where it's safe, going back to origins, I guess. Because when you look at things like Toronto or Montreal, they are influenced by outside sources, such as the European society or American society, such as the Nameless Border in Surfacing. So that sense of having that familiar past, even if we don't remember it, even if we weren't born in that era, it's a Canadian thing.
I think so, because like Seth is obsessed with like the past, with like the comic books history, like the artist history and everything like that. And then with what we all long for, the parents are obsessed with the history of like their culture and everything like that. So that'd be the common thread, would be the history of it. Because even, I guess, in Surfacing, like it's their history as well that she's trying to get rid of, like her parents' history and like where she grew up, the history of everything around there.
Well, I don't necessarily know about the idea of valorizing. I think I experience more as a regularizing of feminine pain, if that makes sense. That maybe it's calling attention to, or perhaps unwittingly making it a part of Canadian history.
So I thought a lot about this question, and I mean, to reread some of those things were, I mean, as a woman, are kind of uncomfortable. But then what I sort of took away from it was that it provided insight to the way that women were treated and to the experiences of women, specific women or specific groups of women in that specific time period, which I thought was really important. I mean, I don't know if we always get a true account of women's experiences and women's treatment in all the writing that we see or that we read. So
I think it's true to some aspect that Canadian literature does valorize feminine pain, because I feel like it's trying to make readers and the audience understand and give value of feminine pain. Like, it is real, it is happening, and most people just ignore it. They don't actually sorry. They don't actually realize that feminine pain is happening. So, for example, you see in Lullabies for Criminals by Heather O'Neill, you see Baby going repeatedly being sexually assaulted by Alfonso, and you see that pain and the struggle she has. And many people don't realize it. Many people might just confuse Baby as being it's her own choice, but rather it's a much bigger choice. And Canadian literature does valorize it. They do give value to make people realize that this sexual exploitation, sexual assault is an important aspect and that people should be aware of it.
I would say that Canadian literature validates women and gives them, by giving them a voice, that Canadian literature is not about celebrating feminine pain, but it's bringing awareness to their suffering and recognizing the realities that women face. Main characters like babies from Lullabies of Little Criminals and the female characters in Surfacing depict how women are silenced, like the videotapes and all that. So Canadian literature is validating women by allowing them to speak of the atrocities that are happening to them, and thus that's a positive thing and not a negative.
I find that all of the female main characters, for protagonist-wise, have been suffering from pain. The most obvious would be Baby from Lullabies for Little Criminals by Heather O'Neill. She's dealing with all versions of pain. I feel like physical, emotional, psychological. For physical pain, being at that age and going through these sexual engagements with men are not only doing a toll on her own body, but her appearance in what she's seeing. So that relationship with pain, the emotional pain being that she's being sexualized and abused by not only her father figure, who is lack thereof, but all the relationships she has. Even so, I wrote my essay. You'd think that females would stick together, but even the female relationships she has, they're damaging. With her friend, who she thought was her friend and then ends up calling her out. And so even in that sense, like, her relationships, they're just painful for her, and just all the psychological trauma. And there was the poems by Louise Haff we read that were filled with feminine pain. The one with the police officer, the Maintain the Right, that one was just vulgar and grotesque. And
I think that that valorizing female pain is something that occurs in Canadian literature, although it kind of has the connotation of something that's negative. But I think the showcasing or the broadcasting of these systems of oppression, especially within female characters, is something that's needed, especially for in a national narrative. I think this happens in Surfacing with Anna's kind of her. She doesn't have the desire to oppose these systems of oppression, whereas when the female protagonist is dumping the film into the water, I see that kind of silence as another system of her oppression and her silencing of not being able to say anything. And then it's probably seen most predominantly, I think, in Maintain the Right. And I think this focus on silence is really important with this valorizing of female characters. First with the silencing of Anna in Surfacing, and then in the silencing that we see that the female character in Maintain the Right won't say anything. At first she's confused by the request that the officer has made, which kind of baffles her, and she's unable to speak. And all this idea of her mouth being full as well as silencing her. That's another system of her kind of silencing, I guess.
I think it depends on the actual text. So I think Maintain the Right, I think it's meant to be uncomfortable and to expose like these experiences that maybe have been silenced in the past. But I think it also works to heal. I think it's Bernice Louise Haff who writes it. I think it's a vehicle of her acceptance and sort of letting go of the things that maybe have happened to her or people that she knows. Oh. Okay.
Something I was kind of thinking is that by attempting to explore and connect to nature, which is often a common theme of Canadian identity, we're simultaneously infiltrating or destroying nature. So I wonder if maybe unintentionally or subconsciously we recognize the violence that is a part of Canada. And maybe we're connecting that to the pain that's represented in the way that women feel. So that's this violence that's so frequent in Canadian literature is also reaching back to the violence that is perpetrated throughout Canadian history and throughout Canadian literature.
Initially, I completely disagreed with it. But then as I was taking a closer look at the works that we have looked at, I believe that Canadian literature uses feminine pain to establish and redefine a patriarchal society. That this was done through female characters conforming to society's expectations of a submissive female character. However, there are still some examples of Canadian literature that we've looked at that contradicts this stereotypical role that I'll discuss momentarily, but I just wanted to look at the pieces of literature that valorizes feminine pain first. So we have Surfacing, and in regards to Anna, she was talking about her perspective of birth control and how she believes it is a male invention at the risk of females. So it's that idea again that females are having to sacrifice something for men because they were forming blood clots from them. And then we have A Bird in the House, where Vanessa is constantly trying to please her father, and she is experiencing this guilt for not attending the Remembrance Day parade. And then It's a Good Life If You Don't Weaken. We have Seth and Ruth's relationship, where Ruth is clearly second to Seth's journey for Cato, and that she's okay with that. She's fine with being not as important to him, but will still continue to stick around. And then Lullabies for Little Criminals. Baby is unable to escape male pressures from Jules and Alphonse, where it doesn't matter where she is and what point in her life she's at, she's always having that dominant male character she has to answer to. And then Vandals, where B is clearly willing to do whatever it takes to protect Ladder's masculinity and making him happy before herself.
I think you're gonna like because everything I just said, when I looked at that question, I kind of laughed.
Yeah.
Because women are not viewed as heroic. They're not, oh, she went through this, so she's so brave and she's courageous and she's like a brave warrior woman. No, like, they rip off their clothing and go roll around in mud because they're psychotic and are having hallucinations. Or they're called liars because we didn't see him do that to you. Was anyone there? Even he doesn't remember what he did to you and Martin John. So how did it really happen? Either they're hallucinating or they must not remember, or this didn't happen. You have no physical proof. You have no proof. No one else can speak for you. And even in Lullabies for Little Criminals, she's just a drug addict who followed her father's footsteps, even though she knew it was wrong. The whole book, she's running away from being exactly what her father is, but she's turning into her father. She turns into him. I don't think it so much for me diminishes their struggles. I feel like people see their struggles for what they are and they pity them. Oh, I feel so bad that happened to you. But they're not people. They're not people. They're not identified as this heroic person who went through this whole battle and had to fight for their own opinion. And in Surfacing, she just goes crazy. Like, women are just depicted as they're too emotional. They know what's wrong and they still go for it. Just like in Lullabies for Little Criminals, they're intelligent people, but they're still doing it. They're still performing those acts. They know that they probably seem crazy. They know it, but they're still doing it. And it made me a little angry.
I thought he was mostly wrong because I looked back at our short stories like Vandals, and that one to me wasn't about where they were. It didn't seem at all important where they were, but more about who the people were. I think the one that would be the environment more than the identity would probably be Surfacing, because she thinks that more of her life should be spent outside, especially when she decides she's going to be an animal. But for her, I felt like it was also about self-discovery too. Like, she went out to understand more about herself and more about her relationship with Joe. And everything they do is outside, but it's still so much about why she was unhappy, why she couldn't have children, and that's why I felt like it was more about herself instead of the environment, because she's not like a activist or feels like she has to save the environment. I mean, she's upset about the bird that gets killed, but she doesn't, you know, start a campaign to save birds or something. So that's what I got from that.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Let's go to question number 4.
I think it's fairly accurate. As far as it goes, I think that where is here was an easier question to address historically, just because it's been so much more concrete. Is to say that, yes, we're here in the wilderness and this is what Canada is. So things, yeah, like surfacing again, The Englishman's Boy, and definitely El Perdido, the country north of Belleville, that sort of thing. It was just not an easy answer, but definitely a more efficient answer. Whereas answering a question such as who am I, is definitely more difficult on a national sense. But I think now, more recently, we're coming to understand how to answer that question just by understanding the polyphonic nature of Canada. So I think some of the recent works that we've studied, What We All Long For, I think it's Squatter as well, just shows that multiple voices that are within Canada's national identity and therefore Canadian literature. So we're starting to answer that question, but primarily we definitely stuck to the where is here.
I think it's pretty accurate. Like when I think of who am I and where is here, I feel like who am I kind of talks more about like older versions of Canadian literature, because I feel like, for example, like the 1960s, people were more so kind of trying to find their history and trying to find who they were. And I can go back to The Surfacing again, where the character had to go back to her roots in order to find like where her father is. And, you know, when she lost both her parents, or when she found out she lost both of her parents, she kind of didn't know who she was. You know, she was always attached to like, oh, I'm the daughter of this and this, but now that their parents are dead, she kind of doesn't know who she is. So, for example, like I think that's kind of who am I, like the older version. And then whereas here, I think goes with more newer contemporary Canadian literature, because I feel like now, I don't know if this really is anything, but when it comes to like social media and stuff, I feel like people have a better understanding of who they are. But I don't know how to explain this, but kind of with Canada growing and becoming more of a urban society, I feel like they just don't know what to call home. And I thought about this when we were looking at was it What We All Long For by Brand, where, you know, for second generation immigrants, they're all, you know, what to call home, but at the same time they all try to leave home because they don't feel like they belong, so they don't know where they belong. Like they know who they are, they know where they came from, but they don't know what to call home.
Well, even just kind of as I already mentioned, I feel like the environment and the surroundings and the cities that the authors talked about in their stories, I felt like like I already said, I feel like they put as much effort into creating a good atmosphere as well as as much effort as they put into characters. And I feel like for even the stories that I've already mentioned, I think that they're all great examples of that, because I feel like if you take what am I trying to say? Just like if you take, for example, someone who grows up, if you're reading about a story of someone who grows up in a small town, like for me, example, I grew up in a small town, very sheltered, like one street, so there was like 3 stores, like that's all like I grew up in. So when I got older to like public school and university, it was like, whoa, like culture shock. Whereas someone in like What We All Long For example, they've already experienced so much, and they grew up, and Baby, when she's younger and she grows up in like Montreal, going all over the city, it's like those experiences shape who you are. And it helped shape those characters, and the authors did a good job at doing that, at making the environment so important. I feel like that's just something, even my mom, she read What We All Long For, and she's like, oh my goodness, like this story like answers her question. But yeah, I just...
For me, I think they both go hand in hand. You can't define who you are by not defining where is here, and you can't define where is here without defining who you are.
And I feel that when I looked at Thomas King's A Seat in the Garden and Joseph Boyden's First Came Truth, it constantly puts the search for the indigenous authentic self into context with the fact that their land was taken away, the fact that their culture was taken away, and what happens when, and they have to find where is here in order to find themselves. And there's a constant struggle to try to claim back the land, claim back what they've lost physically, in order to claim back what they've lost culturally or within their community, and that still hasn't been reunited. So I think that for the indigenous experience, at least, where is here is imperative to understanding who they are. The ties, Simply Singing made a close second. The ties between What We All Long For and Lullabies for Little Criminals.
That's a tough one. I feel like I thought a lot about surfacing. That was one that just kind of always, I would draw things back to that, I guess. I don't know, it was just so intricate, and it was just a very detailed and intense character.
I personally enjoyed Lullabies for Little Criminals the most, which actually surprised me because, like, with my views and everything, I didn't think I'd be comfortable with, like, the drugs and the cussing and, like, her being a prostitute, but I actually really enjoyed it. Like, it didn't bug me as much as Glengarry Glen Ross bugged me.
Probably Lullabies for Little Criminals.
I think Lullabies for Little Criminals.
Lullabies for Little Criminals, for sure.
My favorite text was Lullabies for Little Criminals.
Text. I guess I like the first half of Lullabies for Little Criminals because it showed an innocent girl in an environment where innocence wasn't made fun of. But then the later half kind of screwed me over very much.
But then Into the Ring and We So Seldom Look on Love, I enjoyed like talking about that in class just because it was completely different from everything else we've been looking for. And if we weren't in a contemporary Canadian literature class, I don't think I would know that it was Canadian literature. Because it just seems, because I don't read a lot of Canadian literature. I'm sorry. The one text that I didn't enjoy right away was Eunoia until we had our discussion, and then I was really into it.
It would definitely have to be As Birds Bring Forth the Sun.
Honestly, Lullabies for Little Criminals. I really enjoyed that text.
For Lullabies, what really sticks with me is my sister read it before I started this class, and my sister is like hero, even though I don't want to admit it sometimes.
I loved Eunoia.
I love Lullabies for Little Criminals.
I liked Al Purdy's poems. I really liked the one where you showed us with In the Bar.
It's funny to say because I didn't really take it for its value the first time I read it, but Eunoia is definitely growing on me.
I would probably have to say Eunoia. Even though it was an abstract text that I'm not very good with usually, it had those auditory pieces that kept me engaged and kept me thinking, yeah.
When it gets a tie. And I think it's because Lullabies for Little Criminals, it's it talks about a lot about abuse and trauma, and it talks about that in the context of being a girl. So that's something I personally experienced. So, and I like that it validates that experience. That yes, there is trauma and there is abuse, and this is how people escape, and this is the reality of people's lives. And What We All Long For, I really like that one because I'm from a multicultural background, and a lot of the things I can definitely resonate with, like a lot of how your first generation parents who came from back home, how they bring back their culture or how they think they should do things, and that's put into here, or they think that they have to ascribe to this dream or this standard of getting a job or getting your kids to get a job. And so I feel that that's why those are my favorite texts.
I feel like my definite kind of first, and I also wrote on it, so maybe you can tell, was The Englishman's Boy. was something I found very interesting. I found it the most enjoyable and just outright one of the most beautifully written.
Hands down, Lullabies for Little Criminals. I loved it so much. I'm not gonna sell it back. I'm gonna keep it, and I can see myself reading it over and over. I love that book. It was fantastic. I made my mom read it. She loved it. It was amazing. Like I said, it broke my heart a little bit, but that's what literature's supposed to do a little bit, I think.
Okay. Now the only thing is that I haven't been recording the whole time.
Oh my god.